It was 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday when she tossed the sentence like a used napkin across the coffee table. I had night with my coworker. So what? No hesitation. No blink. No remorse. Just those 8 syllables cutting the air like a scalpel. I didn't flinch. That's the part that bothers her the most now, I think. That I didn't explode, didn't shout, didn't throw the glass of water sitting by my elbow across the room like some B-movie husband in shock. No. I just blinked, once, slowly, like I was trying to recalibrate her voice into something human again. She leaned back against the couch, legs crossed, not even looking at me. She was scrolling through her phone like we were just 2 roommates arguing over whose turn it was to take the recycling out. So what? I repeated under my breath. Not loud enough for her to react, but just enough for the words to settle in my throat like rust. There was a black folder sitting on the end table beside me. It hadn't been there long. I placed it there precisely 17 minutes ago, just after texting her that I'd be home early and we needed to talk. She didn't ask why. I suspect she thought I'd cry or beg. I opened my mouth but said nothing. Not yet. Timing was everything now. Every second that passed without me reacting was another tick on the clock of her unraveling. She just didn't know it yet. Instead of responding, I stood up slowly and adjusted my sleeves. Her eyes flicked up, briefly. She noticed. Good. Let the silence cook her. You're not going to say anything, she said finally, setting her phone down. God, you're always like this. Emotionally constipated. Maybe if you actually cared about something other than your spreadsheets, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. There it was. The pivot. The moment the arsonist blames the matchbox for being too easy to strike. The sheer boldness of it would have been almost admirable if it wasn't so predictably pathetic. Still, I said nothing. I just moved toward the hallway, then paused as if I remembered something. I turned back and tapped the folder twice with my fingers, gently, like knocking on the glass of an aquarium. Her gaze followed my hand. The smile vanished. What's that? I shrugged. Nothing important. Just some notes. Couple of screenshots. Maybe an audio file or 2. I said it casually, like I was commenting on the weather. But I could already see it. Her breathing slowed. Shoulders stiffened. Her phone was back in her hand, and for the first time since I walked in, she wasn't so smug anymore. Screenshots of what? She asked. A crack in her voice. Small. Subtle. But there. I looked at her like I was trying to figure out if she was playing dumb or if she was really that careless. You know, team bonding. That Q3 retreat. The hotel reservations. The matching wristbands. The lunch receipt with the 2 entrees, wine for 2, and the handwritten note from the waitress that said, "Enjoy the honeymoon." Cute touch, by the way. Real subtle. Her lips parted slightly, and for the first time, she had no words. No snark. No venom. Just quiet. Then she tried to laugh, but it came out strangled. Oh, come on. You're really going to HR over this? You're not even part of this department. They'll think you're bitter, jealous. Not HR, I interrupted, tone sharp but calm. Well, not just HR. I tapped the folder again. See, I figured something out last month. You didn't cover your tracks because you thought I was too boring to suspect anything. You're not just sloppy, you're arrogant. She stood now, and I watched the color drain from her face as she moved toward the folder. I stepped in her way, not aggressive, not threatening. Just enough. Her hand froze midair. There's also a copy going to your parents, I added, my voice now almost a whisper, since you used their beach house for your little getaway. Thought they might appreciate the photos of your car parked there overnight while you were supposedly in Atlanta for the sales conference. Her jaw clenched. You're insane, she muttered. I tilted my head. Maybe. But I didn't lie, cheat, and turn my home into a soap opera. I just watched and waited. And then I walked out. Quietly. No slam doors, no dramatic exits. I left the folder exactly where she'd see it and exactly where I needed it to be when her coworker inevitably called, panicked, an hour later. What she didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that this was only the prologue. Because I hadn't just prepared for her fallout. I positioned myself perfectly for the next move. Her lover? Let's just say he has a very specific skeleton in his closet. One that squeaks loudest when he thinks no one's listening. But I was listening. By the time I reached the parking garage, I already knew she'd opened the folder. I didn't need cameras or a message to confirm it. I knew her well enough to picture it exactly. The flick of her manicured nail under the flap, the widening of her eyes at the first photo, the way her face would go slack by the time she reached the time-stamped audio. And then the real kicker, the internal voicemail. It wasn't explicit, nothing you'd hear on some gossip blog or late-night scandal dump. Just a clipped, casual message from her coworker Brian, saved to the company system by mistake 2 weeks ago. Something about meeting again in the conference room after hours. Something about the missing lanyard. But mostly, something about keeping things low until she finalizes the divorce story. Divorce story. Not that we were even discussing divorce. That was just the narrative she'd crafted for him, apparently. I was the unsuspecting dullard in her private soap opera, the placeholder husband she planned to slowly phase out with manufactured conflict and fake counseling appointments. What she didn't count on was that I'd already figured that out too, 6 weeks ago, when I found a sticky note stuck to the back of her planner. Just a list of items, circled. Lawyer. Push counseling. Weekend away, June. Like it was a checklist for gutting a marriage. I slid into the car, engine off, just sat there for a while with the key in my hand. Not turning it. Not moving. Just watching a couple argue at the far end of the lot. The man gestured too big, too loud. The woman walked 5 steps away, turned, barked something back. The theater of the betrayed. Familiar. Exhausting. Predictable. I wasn't going to be that guy. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened an email draft I'd been building for a while. No subject line yet. No body text. Just a list of BCC recipients. HR. Her manager. A shared acquaintance at a professional board she was desperately trying to get a seat on. And yes, her parents. Then I added someone new. Jason Adler. Jason was a name she never mentioned. Too risky. Too close to home. But I remembered it because it came up once, a slip during a wine-heavy dinner with friends when she said, "Ugh, if Jason was still running operations, none of this process nightmare would be happening." Everyone nodded. I just asked, casually, "Who's Jason?" And she waved it off. Old mentor. Turns out Jason Adler is now VP of strategy for the company her lover Brian just got promoted in. And Jason Adler is married to Elise, who happens to be in charge of the ethics committee for that same company. Funny how small the world gets when you're quietly digging. I didn't press send. Not yet. The key to this wasn't destruction, it was precision. If I wanted to set a match to her career, I could have done it weeks ago. But I wanted her to watch the fuse burn. I wanted her to feel it inch closer, helpless to stop it, and unsure of how long she had left before it all went up. My phone buzzed. It was her. "Maddie. We need to talk. Please come back. You're blowing this out of proportion." There it was, the shift from arrogant dismissal to manufactured urgency. She probably didn't know yet how much I'd found. She assumed I'd bluff, or maybe she was banking on my silence, hoping she could cry or scream or seduce her way back into control. Instead, I replied, "Me. You still think this is about you? Send. That's all." I pocketed the phone and started the car. I wasn't going home. Not yet. I had one more stop. Something I'd been putting off. I drove out of the garage and toward a small industrial strip in the south end of town. Auto repair shops, storage units, and one particularly low-profile PI office that operated under the radar. It wasn't listed on Google Maps. You had to know someone. I knew someone. Inside the office was a man named Ellis, retired, grumpy, but effective. He didn't ask questions anymore. Not after the first check cleared. "I need that final file," I said, dropping into the leather chair across from his desk. He nodded and slid over a flash drive. Everything from her work laptop. Full session record. Even the stuff she tried to wipe. You were right. She had a synced backup running without encryption. Amateur hour. I took the drive. No folder. No label. Just cold digital leverage. That was enough. By the time I got back in the car, I had the outline of a plan tightening like a noose around her carefully constructed life. It wouldn't all drop at once. That would be too merciful. Instead, it would drip, emails, social connections, the kinds of questions whispered at water coolers. The kind of HR concern that gets raised over patterns of behavior. I would let her twist while she tried to guess which part of her world would collapse next. But she wasn't the only one I was watching. Brian had a secret of his own. One she clearly didn't know. One he was very, very invested in hiding. And I'd already made my next appointment with someone who'd love to hear it. I waited exactly 26 hours before I replied to her second message. Maddie, can we please talk in person? I didn't handle that well. I was overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. Not wrong. Not sorry. Just overwhelmed. Like her cheating was some involuntary hiccup caused by external pressure, and not, a conscious, repeated action taken on weekday afternoons in a company parking lot. I responded with a single sentence. Me sure. Let's meet where it started. Saturday, 11 a.m. I didn't say where, and she didn't ask. She knew exactly what I meant. The cafe next to her old yoga studio, the one she dragged me to after our second argument in year 2 of marriage to talk through things like adults. That place had 2 things going for it: bottomless mimosas and thin walls. She always chose it for private talks without realizing you could hear everything through the hallway to the restrooms. Fitting, really. I arrived 15 minutes early, ordered an espresso, and took the corner seat that faced the front door. I didn't bring the folder. Didn't need it. Not this time. She showed up wearing the soft gray sweater she always wore when she needed to look vulnerable. I know that sweater like I know the back of my hand. It was her gilt armor. Her chin tucked slightly as she walked in, eyes already shimmering with half-manufactured tears. Maddie, I said, nodding. Calm. Measured. Like she was someone I used to work with and we were catching up. She slid into the seat, fingers nervously running across the edge of her napkin. You look tired. I'm fine, I replied, not asking how she was. We sat in silence for a moment, the waiter hovering nearby, sensing something was wrong but unsure if it was worth interrupting. Maddie eventually waved him off. She took a breath, then another, then dove in. I wanted to explain. Not excuse. Explain. Things have been off between us for a long time, and I think we both know it. I made mistakes. Stupid ones. But I never meant to hurt you. Interesting. I almost laughed. That was the line. I never meant to hurt you. As if there's a form of betrayal that's accidentally erotic and deeply premeditated. Is this the part where you tell me it wasn't about him? I asked, sipping my coffee. No, she said too quickly. Yes. It wasn't about just him. It was about me. My confidence, my place at work, everything felt like it was shifting. I finished. Like tectonic plates under your moral compass? Her jaw flexed. You don't have to be cruel. Cruel would have been sending the folder last night instead of waiting. She blinked. Her hands paused on the napkin. I saw it again, the flicker of fear in her eyes. You haven't sent it yet? No, I said plainly. Not yet. A pause. Why? That one word cracked with panic. Just a hint, but enough. I leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. Because it's not just about you anymore. And now we were in free fall. I watched as her mind ran through 1,000 possibilities, none of them right. That was the beauty of it. She didn't know what I knew, or more importantly, who I'd talked to. You lied to him, too, I said, casually reaching for a sugar packet. Told Brian you'd already started the divorce. That we were just waiting for the right time to make it public. Her breath hitched. That was real, not faked. That was the sound of panic hitting the brakes too late. I didn't. You did. He confirmed it. In fact, I said, stirring the sugar slowly, deliberately, he also told me he's not the only one you've been working late with. Now that was new. She looked up, eyes wide, not with guilt, but confusion. I gave her a second, then dropped it. Someone from legal. Maybe you forgot? He's the one who gave me the time-stamped printouts. The access logs to your shared drive. The same shared drive that contains a PDF titled Exit Strategy, MH with bullet points about stock vesting timelines and narrative positioning in case of contested division of assets. Maddie went pale. You read that? She whispered. Read it? I practically edited it. You should have hired a better ghostwriter, though. Narrative positioning is the kind of phrase that practically screams manipulation. Very on brand, though. She reached into her bag like she might pull out some grand counter-evidence. But all she retrieved was her phone. She fumbled it, hands shaking. Who else have you talked to? I didn't answer. Just stared. Maddie, I said, lowering my voice, you've been very busy creating an exit strategy. What you never considered was that I might have one, too. Her lip twitched. You were always playing checkers, I continued. But I've been playing chess. Quietly. Carefully. While you were fabricating your version of the truth, I was collecting timestamps, IP addresses, cross-referencing hotel bookings, mapping your pattern like a forensic accountant on Adderall. And then came the final twist of the knife. Oh, and by the way, I added, Brian? He's got a little situation of his own. Something that might interest a few folks at compliance. Especially since he forgot to disclose a very specific prior relationship that could tank a pending acquisition deal. That wasn't speculation. That was information. Verified, documented, and ready to slide into an email chain I already had queued and timestamped for Monday morning at 8:01 a.m. Maddie sat frozen. Why are you doing this? She whispered. I smiled, not warmly, not cruelly. Just patiently. Because you made the mistake of thinking betrayal ends with the act itself. It doesn't. It ends when the last piece falls. And sweetheart, I leaned back in my seat, pushing my cup away. We're only just getting started. She didn't touch her drink. Not once. For a woman who'd always punctuated her manipulations with a sip of something, wine, sparkling water, kombucha from a bottle with a sticker that said self-care, her hands were now as still as the grave. That alone told me more than words ever could. What do you want from me? She finally said, voice low. It was the wrong question, and she knew it. But she asked it anyway, hoping for a crack, a thread, anything to regain footing. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, opened the Notes app, and turned the screen toward her. It was a list. Plain text. No emotion. Just 7 lines. April 17th, Marriott, room 923. April 23rd, email from Brian. Subject. Good seeing you again, face-blowing kiss. May 1st, internal memo draft, narrative control, mutual separation. May 6th, wire transfer to joint legal retainer. May 8th, deleted Slack thread, recovered. May 11th, shared folder activity log, download at 2:13 a.m. May 14th, coffee with Jason Adler. Her eyes scanned it, and when she got to the last line, she blinked hard. That last one, she started. Is a courtesy, I said flatly. He doesn't know yet. But I've got the meeting on record. You should have seen his face when I mentioned the ethics committee. Maddie went completely still, and for a moment I saw the layers peeling back. The fake composure, the rehearsed apology, the preloaded lines about communication breakdown. All gone. Underneath it was something raw and panicked and very real. She wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of what I'd already set in motion. Jason won't believe you, she said, recovering just enough to sound almost defiant again. You think he's going to nuke a VP's career over some unverified claim from a bitter ex? You're assuming I told him it was your claim. That stopped her cold. She whispered. You framed Brian? I smiled. Not cruelly. Strategically. No one framed anyone. I just told Jason I was investigating corporate misconduct tied to potential securities issues and undeclared romantic involvement in conflict of interest scenarios. Didn't even mention names. I let him connect the dots. I stood, slowly. Her voice cracked again. Where are you going? I've already got everything I need, I said, tucking my phone back into my coat. You've been the loudest person in the room for months, Maddie. You just never noticed I was taking notes. Wait, she reached out. And I paused. This part was important. I leaned in just slightly, enough that she could see how calm I was. Measured. Controlled. The opposite of what she'd expected when she laid her bombshell on the table back at the house. You spent all that time crafting a version of events that made you the empowered victim, I said quietly. But you forgot something crucial. The moment you spoke your truth, I quoted her sarcastically, you handed me the microphone. And with that, I walked out. But not before placing a napkin next to her untouched coffee. Written on it in sharp black ink was one word. Monday. Not a threat. Not a promise. Just a countdown. Because by Monday morning, every person she was afraid of disappointing HR, her professional board, her parents, Jason Adler, would have a piece of the puzzle. Not all of it. Not yet. That's what made it exquisite. They'd each get just enough to ask questions, but not enough to answer them without her help. She'd either start lying to cover it up, or start confessing. Either way, the cracks would spread. Slowly. Strategically. Publicly. And while she spiraled trying to extinguish fires she couldn't even see yet, I was already on my way to the next boardroom. The one Brian didn't know I'd scheduled, with someone who had a very different version of events about how their last product launch really got greenlit. Because this wasn't just about exposing a cheater anymore. This was about burning the entire strategy. By Sunday evening, Maddie had pinged me 8 times for texts, 2 emails, and 2 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize but had her fingerprints all over it. Probably her sister. Or her assistant. The same one who used to awkwardly nod at me when we passed each other in the hallway at holiday parties, silently apologizing for knowing more than she should have. I ignored them all. Instead, I spent the night preparing 3 identical envelopes. Each held a short, polite letter. Each had a copy of a single photo, black and white, clean, time-stamped. Maddie and Brian, 2 people who once built an entire presentation on professional boundaries and client-facing roles, leaning across a cocktail table in Chicago with their badges flipped around and no space between them. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was better. It was suggestive. Just enough to plant doubt. And right now, doubt was the most powerful tool I had. Truth is rigid. But doubt? Doubt spreads. The envelopes were labeled like chess moves. HR, just FYI. Ethics, review request. Elise Adler, private and confidential. I didn't hand them off. That would be reckless. Instead, I mailed them through different drop points around the city. No fingerprints. No digital trail. Just old-fashioned chaos by courier. Then I sat back and waited for Monday. 8:01 a.m. My scheduled email to Brian's department had hit her inbox right on time. Subject line, potential exposure risk pre-acquisition NDA breach. It wasn't accusing him of anything. It didn't need to. It just contained a curious screenshot of a Slack exchange between Brian and Maddie, dated a week before the acquisition announcement was public. Again, not fire. Just smoke. Because I wanted them to go looking. I wanted them to discover things accidentally. Like the way HR would find her badge swipe history didn't align with her logged working hours. Or how the compliance system would flag the suddenly restored shared drive folder she thought she deleted. Meanwhile, Maddie must have known the walls were closing in, because that afternoon, she showed up at my office. She shouldn't have even known where it was new job, new building, but I had made a very intentional mistake. I'd left one of my business cards in the glove box of our old car, the one she still used when she needed something less flashy for her suburban meetings. She walked in looking worse than I'd ever seen her. Not unkempt. No, Maddie never unraveled in public. But her outfit didn't match. That was the tell. She had always been surgically composed. But that day, she wore navy and black, her version of an identity crisis. 5 minutes, I said without standing up. That's all you get. She sat slowly, like her body was debating whether it deserved furniture. They know, she said. HR called me. Then Elise. Then Jason. I nodded. So the postal service still works. That's good to know. She didn't laugh. She looked at me like she wanted to cry, but didn't have enough dignity left to fake it. You made your point. I smiled. Oh, Maddie, you still think this was about point-making? This was about balance. About letting the weight of your decisions land where they should have all along. She pressed her palms into her knees, like she was grounding herself. You don't know what you're doing. You've created something you can't control now. Maybe, I said, folding my hands. But at least I'm not pretending anymore. You spent 2 years telling me we were building a future, while filing away Plan BS under new names and hotel Wi-Fi. She looked at me like she wanted to claw her way out of the conversation. But then something shifted. Her shoulders dropped. Her eyes hardened. You think Brian was the plan? She asked, voice low and venomous. He was a pawn. He was supposed to be a scandal sponge. You think I was sloppy? I wanted you to find it. That stopped me. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I knew you were suspicious. I fed you what you needed. I needed you angry enough to walk. I needed you to burn it down, not because I was guilty, but because it would clear the board for me. My silence was not hesitation. It was recalibration. You used Brian as bait, I said slowly. She nodded. He's arrogant. Sloppy. Perfect for plausible deniability. I never sent that memo to legal. I left it open on purpose. I never deleted the Slack messages. I let you collect evidence like a kid hunting for eggs. I looked at her carefully. Why? Because I wanted out, she said. But not with a divorce battle. With leverage. Sympathy. You weren't supposed to build your own endgame. You were supposed to react. You were always the reactor. She stood. And now, you're not. There it was. The real panic behind her eyes. I hadn't played my role. I'd rewritten the ending, and now she was dangling over a void she thought she'd built for me. You planned your own fall, I said softly, and forgot what gravity feels like. She reached into her coat and pulled out a single document, signed by her lawyer. Drafted settlement terms. Still time to make this quiet, she said. I took the page, scanned it, smiled. I'll think about it. She left, not knowing I had already scheduled a different kind of meeting for later that day, with a man who had no idea his name was about to show up in a subpoena request. Because Maddie may have set this board, but she forgot one simple rule. In chess, the queen has power, but the pawn decides how far the game goes. Tuesday morning opened with rain. No drama, no thunderclap, just a slow, soaking drizzle that made everything feel heavier. The kind of rain you don't hear until it's already soaked through your coat. Fitting. The air felt thick with consequence. At 9:13 a.m., Maddie's name disappeared from her company's internal directory. No announcement. No memo. Just gone. The same way you quietly remove a cracked glass from a dinner table before it cuts someone. She hadn't texted me since dropping off the settlement draft. She was waiting. Watching. She thought this was a choice I had to make. Like I'd been brought to the fork in the road and needed time to pick a direction. But what she never realized was I'd built a third path weeks ago. A path that didn't end in money or lawyers or shared statements. A path that ended with exposure, not of her affair, but of how she orchestrated the fall. And who helped her do it? Enter David Lynn. I'd met David once at a charity dinner. CFO. Quiet. Buttoned up. Polite in a way that suggested therapy and mild anti-anxiety meds. Not the kind of guy you remember. But I did. Because David Lynn was the one who signed off on the internal consulting budget that covered Maddie's out-of-state retreats. And he was the one who received, then archived, an anonymous HR complaint about a romantic entanglement affecting team dynamics 3 months ago. That complaint vanished. But Ellis, my PI, pulled a backup copy from an old shared server no one bothered to decommission. It was timestamped, traced, and very, very real. So I sent David an email. Short, clinical, subject, notice of potential disclosure conflict. Body. David, I believe you're aware of certain patterns regarding employee conduct, travel reimbursements, and complaint suppression tied to MH and BR. I'm extending a professional courtesy by offering you the chance to respond or recuse before this escalates. I'll await your discretion. See. He replied within 41 minutes. David, please, no email. Can we speak privately? I'll make time. Anytime. I suggested 3 p.m. A quiet restaurant in a corner of Midtown where no one important ever eats after lunch. He agreed. When I arrived, he was already seated. Nervous. Sweat shining above his collar. The man looked like he'd been waiting to confess for years. I didn't think it would become all this, he said without a hello. I thought she just needed space. I didn't look. I didn't know they were serious. They weren't, I said. She was using him. He blinked. She told me Brian was pushing, that he threatened to go public. She said she needed time to clean it up without damaging the board vote. Board vote. He paled. Jesus. You really don't know. No, I said. I really do. But I want to hear your version. So he talked. Spilled, actually. Maddie had been positioning herself for a spot on the executive board of a rising tech startup, small now, but well-funded, and very much in the news. Clean image, progressive values, zero-tolerance internal ethics code. She had orchestrated her exit from her current company to coincide with the board announcement, a seamless transition. A redemption arc, even. The brilliant strategist wronged by scandal, now rising above it with clarity and grace. But to pull it off, she needed to create a controlled burn. A scandal she could spin. Something that wasn't her fault. Enter Brian, the reckless coworker. The inappropriate flirtation. The regrets. She needed to look like a woman cornered by a man's inappropriate behavior and trapped in a company that protected him. So she whispered to HR. Just enough. Left breadcrumbs for me. Let the story breathe. But when I didn't explode on cue, when I went silent instead of confrontational, her script started to unravel. She said you'd go nuclear, David whispered, still in awe. She said she was counting on it. I know. He looked up. I think I'm in trouble. I sipped my water. Not yet. Then I leaned in. But you will be, unless you give me the emails. The reimbursement forms. The calendar invites. The archive folder labeled, Retreat Oversight. You thought you deleted in March. He froze. You? You saw that? I saw the log. I want the contents. He swallowed. If I give you that, what happens to me? I considered that for a moment. Then I said the only thing that mattered. That depends on how quickly I get it. By 5:22 p.m., a flash drive was waiting in my office mail slot. Inside were 14 emails, 6 internal memos, and a PDF Maddie had labeled Q4 Recovery Strategy, Potential Leverage Channels. It was pure poison. The kind of document that HR departments bury in legal cement. It referenced names, negotiations, and most importantly, phrasing that implied premeditated use of false harassment claims as a career tool. And that changes everything. Because now, I wasn't the only one she underestimated. There were others. Real victims. People she stepped over, silenced, redirected, also she could stage her elegant fall. And I had just unlocked the vault of her collateral damage. The chessboard had widened. Maddie thought we were playing 1:1. She forgot. When pawns reach the other side, they can become anything. Wednesday. 4:47 a.m. I was awake, fully dressed, seated at the kitchen counter with a legal pad and 2 mugs of coffee, both black, both cold. One for me. One placed directly across, untouched. Symbolic, maybe. Or maybe I was just waiting to see if she'd show up at my door again with that worn-out expression of tactical regret. She didn't. Instead, something better did. At 5:02 a.m., an automated server dump from Ellis landed in my inbox. It was scheduled to ping me if his surveillance systems ever picked up activity on a certain cloud account Maddie had once used for freelance projects, back when she still played the humble strategist working nights from our living room. She'd abandoned it over a year ago, or so she thought. But that morning, it lit up. Just one file. Accessed for 11 seconds. Then gone. The file name? Synthesis.docs. I opened the backup Ellis had quietly mirrored during the download. At first glance, it looked like a pitch deck. A case study. Standard corporate fluff. But buried on page 6 were these words. If primary narrative fails, divorce as abuse, workplace harassment, pivot to mental health prior miscarriage, medication tapering, burnout language. Target audience. Women 30 to 45, progressive circles, brand-aligned partnerships. Use anecdotal posts on Medium/Substack to build post-fall sympathy arc. She had scripted her own Phoenix moment. Even in disgrace, Maddie planned to rise carefully, publicly, with hashtags and raw honesty posts scheduled like press junkets. It wasn't just reputation management. It was opportunistic reinvention. She was going to monetize the fallout. And that's when I knew this wasn't about us. It never had been. I was just the prop in her crisis to brand funnel. Brian, the pawn. David, the vault. But me? I was the final scapegoat. The safe male villain to offset her redemption narrative. So I switched gears. No more hints. No more elegant silence. It was time to crack the narrative mid-sentence. At 7:46 a.m., I scheduled 3 social posts, anonymous, curated, and ready for peak engagement hours. One for a tech industry forum. One for a Women in Startups LinkedIn group, and one for a private Slack community where Maddie once claimed to be mentoring future female leaders. All 3 posts included the same link. When strategy becomes survival, the cost of corporate manipulation. The article was written under a pseudonym and framed as an exposé, one that never named Maddie directly but laid out a scenario so specific, so textured, that everyone close to her world would know exactly who it was about. It wasn't revenge porn. It was revenge journalism. The kind with hyperlinks, references, and footnotes. The kind that asks questions louder than it makes claims. The kind that leaves a reader unsettled, staring at the ceiling wondering how much of what they applauded was ever real. By noon, the link had been shared 174 times. By 3 p.m., Maddie's professional blog was locked behind a password. And by 4:30 p.m., a post appeared on her public Instagram account. One of those white text on black background notes, a common tool in the Influencer Damage Control Starter Pack. I want to speak from the heart and take accountability for my part in recent events. She didn't name me. She didn't name Brian. She blamed a toxic environment, trauma, and personal health setbacks. The tone was vague, conciliatory, and most of all curated. The kind of post you read, feel sorry for, and scroll past. But not this time. Because at 5:01 p.m., Elise Adler issued a statement through the ethics board. They had decided not to proceed with Maddie's nomination to the executive committee, citing ongoing internal reviews, not accusations. Reviews. It was subtle, but in PR language, it was a guillotine drop. I didn't smile when I read it. I didn't celebrate. I just circled one sentence from synthesis.docs and wrote next to it in ink. You tried to become a martyr before anyone lit the fire. And now? Now the fire was real. But the story wasn't hers anymore. She wasn't the survivor. She wasn't the victim. She was the architect of her own collapse, and the world was finally starting to see the blueprint. I'd cracked open the scaffolding of her persona. But I wasn't done. Not until I exposed the final beam, the origin of the entire plan. The man who helped her design it in the first place. And he had just messaged me. Unknown number, you don't know what you're getting into. Let's talk. Name the place. Thursday, 11:58 a.m. I parked 2 blocks away from the cafe, not the yoga-adjacent one Maddie always chose for her rehearsed vulnerability, but a smaller, forgotten spot near the courthouse. No art on the walls. No smiling staff. Just bitter coffee, cracked leather booths, and a clientele made mostly of people who talk too loudly on Bluetooth headsets. Perfect for conversations that needed to disappear into background noise. He was already there when I walked in. Dark blazer. Aviators on the table. Elbows on the wood like a man used to owning rooms but not recently. He looked up when I sat down. Didn't smile. Didn't offer his hand. Just nodded once. Mr. Halpern, he said. It was deliberate. My full name. Formal. Calculated. This man didn't do casual. You've got 5 minutes, I said, leaning back. Then I'm walking. He studied me for a second. Not sizing me up. Calculating risk. Damage control, masked as confidence. You don't know what she was into. Then enlighten me. He paused, exhaled, then said something I didn't expect. She didn't come up with the plan alone. No preamble. No denial. Straight to it. He slid a manila folder across the table. Inside, a stack of documents. Most of them stamped with a small watermark. Ranford Strategies, Confidential. That was a name I hadn't heard in years. A boutique firm Maddie briefly consulted with before she landed her VP role. She said it was brand work, nothing serious. A few weeks, maybe a month. What I now held was over 6 months' worth of strategy documents. But this wasn't marketing. It was behavioral architecture, titled modules like Controlled Scandal as Elevation, Leveraging Sympathy to Displace Accountability, Male Archetypes, From Villain to Vehicle, Burnout Narrative, and the Redemption Arc. Each one laid out like a playbook. Case studies, social framing techniques, preferred press outlets, scripts for public, rebuilding phases post-scandal. This is real. I asked. He nodded once. We built her a path. She improved on it. Got creative. Got cocky. You were her handler? No, he said. I was her mirror. She needed a reflection that confirmed she was right. That this was the smart move. I just didn't think she'd take it off script. And Brian. Useful. Disposable. He looked almost bored saying it. As if reducing a human being to a PR sandbag was just part of the business. You came here to clear your name? I asked. No, he said flatly. I came here because I think she's planning something else. Something you haven't accounted for yet. That got my attention. She's not trying to survive this, he continued. She's trying to pivot. That folder you leaked? That wasn't her backup plan. That was bait. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a single page. Printed screenshot. A tweet scheduled through a third-party app. Some stories are harder to tell than others. Thank you to the producers who reached out. I've decided it's time. Attached was a blurry photo of Maddie. Studio lighting. Makeup. Half a smirk. The kind of face people either rally behind or despise. She's got a podcast deal, he said. A book agent. Maybe a docuseries. Based on a lie, I snapped. He didn't flinch. No one cares if it's real. They care if it's felt. She's going to turn this into content, and she's going to do it before your version cements itself. She knows how to ride the outrage wave. All she needs is a 1-minute clip of you looking cold, dismissive, calculated, and she wins sympathy. I stared at him. Why are you helping me? Because she cut me out, he said, almost amused. She thinks she doesn't need the architect anymore. And because if she burns it all down, she'll make sure I'm standing right under the rafters with you. He slid a thumb drive across the table. She kept recordings. Of you. Of Brian. Of me. She calls them framing tools. One of them? She edited to make it sound like you threatened her. My stomach dropped half an inch. She was saving it, he continued. For the moment things got too real. For the exact kind of story that needs a hook. I took the drive. No label. Just dead weight. She's betting you'll go too far. That you'll destroy yourself trying to destroy her. And then she gets to rise from that too. I said nothing for a long time. Finally, I asked, what do you want? He smirked. Nothing. I already lost. I just want the ending to be honest. Whatever that looks like. I left without shaking his hand. Back in the car, I plugged the drive into a burner laptop. Folder after folder, voice notes, edited audio timelines, Photoshop mock-ups of potential PR headlines. Even a calendar. Friday was circled. Friday launch with teaser clip. She was planning to go live. A full narrative dump. Her version. Carefully cut. Elegantly tragic. I checked the clock. Less than 24 hours. That's when I made a decision I hadn't expected to make. I wasn't going to stop her. I was going to follow her in and flip the table mid-broadcast. Because there's one thing Maddie never learned in her playbooks, her guides, her glossy PDFs about influence and image. If you let the villain into your story, he gets a monologue too. Friday, 9:03 a.m. Her teaser dropped. 64 seconds. Black and white filter. Close-up on her face, lit softly from the side. Piano music playing under a voiceover she must have recorded in a sound booth, because it was perfect, just the right balance of vulnerability and conviction. There's a version of this story you've heard. And then, there's the truth. I've stayed silent because I believed in protecting people I once loved. But silence is a cage, and today, I'm walking out. Hashtags line the caption like landmines. Hashtag reclaiming my voice. Hashtag corporate survivor. Hashtag the real story. Hashtag burnout culture. Hashtag from ashes we arise. I watched it 5 times. Not because I was stunned, but because I wanted to understand the rhythm. The beats. The frame. She was staging this like a courtroom, but instead of a jury, she had an algorithm. And I knew how to speak its language better than she thought. At 9:27 a.m., her email list went live with a pre-registration link to a raw, unedited tell-all podcast episode titled Episode 1, The Lie That Looked Like Love. That's when I uploaded mine. It wasn't a podcast. It wasn't even a post. It was a leak. A 26-minute video, audio synced, fact-checked, no narration, no voice, just a sequence of documents, timestamps, chat logs, internal memos, audio distortions showing the edits she made to paint me as abusive. 2 waveform timelines layered against each other. One was her cut. The other, the original. And one line stood out in both. Her voice, rehearsed but still unmistakably her, saying, "Just make sure he's angry. That's what sells. Not truth or rage." It spread fast. By 10:15, it had 11,000 views. By 10:46, her subreddit locked due to moderation overload. By 11:03, her publisher's assistant issued a clarification statement on Twitter. "We are pausing the Maddie H. series until further internal discussion." But this wasn't about views. Not for me. It was about interrupting the script, tearing the prologue out of her hands before she could finish page 1. At 11:15, I got an email from her. No subject line, just the body. "You don't know what you've done." At 11:20, I replied, "No, Maddie, you don't know what you started. But here's the part one hadn't told anyone, not even Ellis, not even David, not the man in the cafe with the folder and the warning. Her story wasn't just built on lies. It was built on borrowed lies. See, I'd found something else on that flash drive. A section labeled, Beta Narratives Discarded. It was a list of trial personas she'd been crafting long before the affair with Brian. Prototypes. Drafts. Like a novelist building backstory. Victim of an alcoholic spouse. Whistleblower framed by middle management. Woman gaslighted into therapy after uncovering corporate fraud. None of it true, but all of it prepared. Each story paired with bullet points. Relatable entry point. Public sympathy potential. Scandal deflection strategy. Soundbite options short form. She didn't just manipulate the truth. She manufactured it. And now? Now she was cornered not by me, not by Brian, not even by the PR fallout, but by the receipts. The video had made it to an investigative podcast subreddit. People were dissecting it. Not for gossip. For evidence. Maddie was no longer a brand. She was a case study. At 1:04 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Same one as before. I picked up. Silence. Then, you think this is a win? Her voice was calm. That terrified me more than if she'd screamed. You think people care about truth? She asked. They don't. They just want a better story. You gave them one today. But what about tomorrow? Next week? When they forget? What then? See? I let the silence stretch before answering. They won't forget, Maddie. Because I won't let them. She hung up. I stared at the wall for a moment, letting her final words ring in my head. She was right, in one way. People do forget. Unless you remind them. So I opened a new folder on my desktop. Labeled it. Act 2. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. She hadn't fallen. She was pivoting again. And this time, she wasn't playing defense. She was reloading. Saturday, 2:41 a.m. I wasn't asleep. I don't even pretend anymore. I just sit in the dark with the hum of the fridge and the flicker of my second monitor cycling through browser tabs. Some men heal through closure. I operate on evidence. It's cleaner. No expectations. Just logic, timestamps, and the clockwork of unraveling a lie. And then the alert hit. It wasn't public. Not yet. It was an update to a private Slack thread, one of the legacy channels Maddie used when she worked on her mentorship pipeline. Ellis had installed a passive script weeks ago, triggered by a handful of phrases. One of them was pivot angle. She just dropped a Google Doc titled Act 2, From Fallout to Foundation. I opened it. 2 pages. A strategy memo. A voice memo attached at the bottom. This isn't the end, it's the ignition. People want a story of growth. That's what I'll give them. A woman who stumbled, yes. But one who stood back up, stronger, more self-aware. Not a victim. A survivor of her own mistakes. She was spinning again. The leak had hit her harder than she expected, but she wasn't retreating. She was rebuilding. Turning public scrutiny into content. She had even mapped it out. Appear on a healing-focused podcast. Publish a Medium post titled, Owning My Missteps. Stage a closed-room Zoom with select influencers and mental wellness leaders to control the tone. Drop a donation to a women's trauma nonprofit, strategically timed. Then return to LinkedIn with a rebrand as a narrative recovery coach. She was going to monetize her own cancellation. And the most infuriating part? She'd probably pull it off. Unless I changed the narrative again. At 3:07 a.m., I logged into an old platform she'd forgotten existed, an archive team portal from a side project she managed 3 years ago. Her assistant at the time had full admin rights. That assistant? Lila Barnes. Fired for performance issues. But Lila had emailed me last week. Quietly. Hesitantly. Said she saw the viral video. That it explained a lot. She'd included a password. I accessed the back end. Buried in a subfolder. 6 audio clips. 5 mundane. But the 6th? It started with Maddie saying, Look, if you want to stay, you'll need to forget what I said in that meeting. David panicked. He'll calm down. And anyway, you don't have proof. Only emotion. That's not admissible. The rest was a pattern of quiet coercion. She wasn't just playing PR games. She had been silencing people for years. Not lawsuits. Not payouts. Just quiet pressure. Ambiguity. Words like future recommendations and internal references. By sunrise, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about everyone else she discarded on her climb, people like Lila, who got erased so Maddie could keep her narrative tight. People who didn't have Ellis, or a lawyer, or the luxury of being cold-blooded when betrayed. So I started writing. Not a leak, not an expose. A timeline. Chronological. Clean. No commentary. Just names, redacted where needed, roles, and patterns. Her system of quiet removal. Her pressure points. Her history of calculated implosions and reinventions. By noon, it would land in the inbox of one very specific person. Maya King, investigative reporter, specializes in brand collapses, particularly of the progressive savior variety. She doesn't report gossip. She reports systems. I included the flash drives, the access logs, Lila's consent, David's confession, everything. Because Maddie was no longer just an ex. She was a case study in reputational warfare, and she was still 2 moves ahead. But I was ready. Part 11 is her final move, and mine. Sunday, 8:02 p.m. The message came through encrypted. Subject line, "Are you ready for her?" It was from Maya King. She didn't waste time. No pleasantries. Just a one-line body. "Your timeline checks out. I have sources. But she's making a move tonight." Attached was a screenshot from Maddie's private Substack backend. Ellis had ghost-synced her draft queue before she could hit publish. The title? "The Man Behind the Curtain, My Truth About the Abuse I Survived." I stared at the screen long enough for the cursor to go idle. It wasn't just a pivot. It was an ambush. The first 2 paragraphs were written in her signature tone, carefully broken syntax that mimicked rawness, but bled strategy. For years, I kept silent. People think manipulation only happens in one direction. But power, when it's cold and quiet, is the most dangerous kind. He knew how to hurt me without leaving bruises. I left because I was afraid of what silence would cost me. I'm speaking now because truth, my truth, can't live in the shadows anymore. She was framing me as the villain. Again. But this time, it wasn't about cheating. It was about emotional abuse. A complete narrative reversal. She wasn't the strategist anymore. She was the survivor of the strategist. She had weaponized my precision, my silence, my refusal to explode, and rebranded it as threat. There was a photo attached too. From a party 3 years ago. I was holding a drink, mid-conversation, eyes narrowed, probably trying to remember someone's name. She captioned it. The last night I tried to pretend everything was normal. I didn't feel rage. I felt calculation. She wasn't trying to win back sympathy. She was erasing the leak, drowning the facts in a sea of curated pain. And it might have worked, if I hadn't been ready. At 9:01 p.m., Maya published her piece. Redemption sold separately, the PR machinery behind a personal brand collapse. It opened like this. What if the person claiming to rise from the ashes lit the fire themselves? What if sympathy wasn't healing but leverage? The article didn't name Maddie. It didn't have to. It laid out a blueprint. How influencer narratives are tested in quiet circles. How trauma is shaped into monetized arcs. How plausible deniability is engineered through messiness and self-discovery. It referenced a composite case study built from Maddie's emails, voice notes, Slack logs, and coaching templates, including a direct quote. "Own a small mistake loudly, so they don't look deeper." And people looked. Within an hour, Redemption sold separately was trending on 2 major platforms. By midnight, Maddie's Substack crashed. By 1:14 a.m., 3 of her most vocal online supporters deleted their threads. And at 2:07 a.m., she went dark. No posts, no responses, no statement. But I wasn't done, because the final nail in the narrative was still tucked in my back pocket. At 3:26 a.m., I dropped the full uncut clip. The original audio, no splices, no drama. Just Maddie, alone, pacing, rehearsing lines for the draft she'd never sent. If they think I broke down, I win. If they think I calculated it all, I lose. But what if I show them both? Just enough pain. Just enough precision. That's what makes a good story. 30 seconds of naked intent. No commentary. Just her voice. Honest. Candid. Unmistakable. It didn't go viral. It went quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't scream, just suffocates. Because in that moment, people didn't rage. They realized. And that's more dangerous than any headline. She tried to make me the villain. So I gave her truth. And truth didn't just take her stage. It burned it down. Tomorrow is Monday. The fallout begins. And in part 12, I decide if I disappear or step into the ashes she left behind. Monday, 6 a.m. No caffeine. No screens. Just silence and a single printed page on the kitchen table. One sentence, circled in black ink. If they think I broke down, I win. No noise online. No retaliation. No apology tour. Just absence. Maddie vanished like she'd never existed. She didn't deactivate. She evaporated. Substack, Twitter, even her private Discord vanished overnight. And then the messages started coming in. Lila, I didn't think anyone would ever believe me. David, she's gone from the org chart. Like she was never there. Ellis, her email pinged off a hotel Wi-Fi in Toronto. Burner account. Name's fake. She wasn't destroyed. She escaped. Reinvention is a form of power. And Maddie knew how to wield it like a blade. She didn't wait for the backlash. She disappeared before anyone could process the story. Let the silence fill the gaps. And I realized this was her last move. Vanishing was the final act. Not a retreat. A reset. She left the scandal in my hands. The confusion, the media haze, the unraveling. She gave me the microphone and walked off stage knowing full well the audience doesn't remember the facts. They remember who looked tired at the end. I sat with that. And then I made my decision. No interviews. No press rebuttals. No book deal. I declined every request. I let Maya's article stand on its own. No follow-up. No sequel. Just a single moment of unpolished reality, left untouched, because some truths don't need retelling. But I wasn't done. I took the flash drive, the timeline, the documents, everything, and mailed it and signed to the corporate firm Maddie once called her stepping stone. They'd already scrubbed her name from the board vote. But this would make sure she'd never be recycled back into the machine. The drive included one last file she never knew I had. A voice memo recorded not for publication, but for herself. A raw note, late at night, left on her phone after she found out Brian was married and the affair was going to leak early. It was supposed to be cleaner. I just needed someone stupid enough to burn it all down. That line, I made it the title. It was never released publicly. It didn't need to be. It was delivered privately, to the only people that mattered. The ones who could make sure the next version of her never got funding, platform, or a second stage. Quiet. Strategic. Permanent. The difference between revenge and strategy is witnesses. Revenge is loud. Strategy doesn't need applause. And as I stepped out into the cold morning, I realized I never needed to win. I just needed her to lose privately. No credits. No curtain call. Just absence where her name used to be. Game over.